You're listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void. Night Stories, a wonderful program of stories and music that rivals the moon in radiance. Chapter 1, The Great Achievement. Part 3, A Dream. I dream regularly and almost always recall some figment of a fragment upon waking. As a child, I had impossible dreams of flying turtles, of turning into planets. But at some point in the last 30 years, such wild visions found their retirement, and my dream life became indistinguishable from my waking life. A typical dream might have me washing mildly dirty dishes, or putting things away, towel after towel, or getting dressed very slowly, shoe after sock and bit by bit, in the very clothes I daily wore. The only real difference, the only way I could clearly say a dream was a dream, and not some memory boiled up from yesterday, was from the air of mystery and anticipation that clung to these common visions. For in these dreams of washing and dressing and putting things away, it was as though I was waiting for the old wildness to suddenly commence, that the flying turtles were just around the corner of my pantry, and that very soon I'd stop the towel piling and transform into a planet. Such launchings away never transpired until I moved to the cave. Strange dreams, cave dreams, I suppose, and not dreams so much as one ongoing single dream that came to me each night. In the dream itself, I would find myself waking in the cave, but upon stepping out, I would find myself not in the rocky talus on Market Mountain, but set upon an island, alone in a vast and violent sea. Somewhere near, though I could not see her, the girl in the sackcloth was watching. I knew as well in the dream that the earth had been covered over in ocean, and in the distance I could see a gargantuan wave gathering to height, raising the entire scrim of the horizon, and clarifying in its bulk as it flew nearer. In the dream, I had named the wave David Titan, and I knew that when the wave finally arrived, it would obliterate the island. And so I was intent, casually, on finding a way to stay alive, and knew there was something on the island that could keep me safe. But what? So I fished along, kicking over the mechanical rubbish, for the island was not a real island, but a floating pile of futuristic rubbish, technological trash, computer parts and screens and motherboards and mechanical limbs and prosthetics, and the casing forms of discarded robots. Ringing the island was a kind of beach of lesser parts, keyboard letters, colorful wires, plastic knobs, amidst a slurry of screws and nuts. I searched and searched, trying to remember what it was that might save me from the David Titan, which now mistily loomed, and upon whose gibbering landscape I could see the tiny forms of falling fish, spinning out from the sides and dropping down, only to be caught up again in the lower part of the wave as it hurtled on. Fish, I thought, until the wave drew close enough that I could see that these were not minnows, but great whales made minnow-like by the scale of the approaching wall of water. As the great explosive crash of the David Titan fell over me, I woke. I will tell you now of my several attempts to at first kindly meet with, later angrily confront, and finally perhaps apprehend the girl in the sackcloth, to discover why she was monitoring me and how she'd snuck into the cinema screen of my dreams. Attempt 1. The feeble demand in which I simply yelled things. Although later ashamed of this attempt, I consoled myself with the likely truth that really anyone in my circumstance someone being so stealthily tracked and spied upon would have started here. And so, for example, when sensing the girl's presence, or out near the river drinking, or in the fields eating berries, I found myself standing up quite rigidly, achieving vertical heights I hadn't in many years, and calling out, "I see you there. Come forward, you. There's no use hiding. I've caught you now." Of course, there was every use in hiding, which use she made perfect use of, and despite repeated failure, I persisted heartily in this fashion, somehow believing very strongly in the stone power of that linchpin line, "There's no use hiding," especially as I found myself becoming quite fond of uttering it. "There's no use hiding, young lady. I've got you now." "There's no use hiding, my dear. Nowhere to run." "You may think it true, but honestly there's no use hiding. I clearly see you and have caught you red-handed in the act." Utter failure. All this established was the proof of where the real power lay. Every ball was truly both hers and in her court. Oh, but did I love saying it. "There's no use hiding. I've got you now." Attempt 2. The not-so-hot pursuit. As my words proved trackless, I finally decided on action, and when I next thought I'd caught a flicker of her hair or dress, I thrust myself into the chase, jogging as vigorously as I might in her general direction. Withering, blithering attempts that crushed me with exhaustion, she was simply too quick, fast as a bird, and my running pace proved the unqualified equal to my walking pace. That is to say, while I did try to run, I seemed to have forgotten how exactly to mount the campaign. All the energy I intended forwardly instead exploded from my every limb to the outward. Instead of running, I performed a monster's gyre, and therewith became a whirling dervish, arms windmilling, legs a-kick, eyes aflame. Certainly fulsome, clearly frightening, but the sad final result being nothing earned in terms of an approaching, apprehending velocity. While these chase-afters may have failed to produce the intended result, they did succeed in unexpected ways, for they did establish that the girl was indeed real, and not some legendary concoction of the cave monster. For as I meleeed after her, I could fully see her racing away from tree to rock to tree, while I never glimpsed her face, and she remained, as before, a creature of dark hair, bare feet, and dirty sackcloth. I did note a double strangeness in her bearing, for she did not run quite in keeping to the way that I did not run, but whereas I had become a plodding berserker, she instead simply ambled with incredible speed. And I mean, she was so fleet she nearly blurred, and as well she did not bump up and sway down over the uneven land, but rather smoothly, enchantingly, and prettily glided. By means of these speedy retreats she became more real, as an actual thing upon the earth, and less real, as I have never seen anything with feet so unconvincingly self-convey over such rough terrain. A final detail emerged during my last attempt to chase her down. I was out for a sip of moonlit stream before heading to the cave for sleep when I felt her queer cold presence just behind me. I whirled around and took off like a hairy bullet from a bamboo straw, like a balloon animal in a handmade wind. The dim crest of light at that hour meant I could only see the gravy smear of her dress, and yet right before she was gone from sight, I glimpsed something so unusual that I ceased to chase her, that my eyes be still, and I see it clear for as long as I might. For in the place that I suggested to myself might be her neck, the tiniest of green lights winked brightly through the drape of her hair, a blinking green diode. "What the devil?" I called out. "What the devil?" What the devil indeed. This new facet, this strange emission of green necklight, brought forth in me an angry mood. All the balls were hers, and the playing field had at last revealed itself to be neither level nor a field where any game I knew might be played. At any rate, I had hitherto considered her to be something of the land, made as I was of flesh and rock and bird and tree, but this green necklight multiplied together with the girl's ability to move with such uncanny, smooth velocity, made the girl no longer a girl, but a kind of computerized and alien other, and otherly in a direction other than the otherly I supposed and preferred, cold instead of warm, technologic instead of organic, creepy instead of strange. It was then that I thought of Mrs. Lady's exotic chickens, and her farm, surrounded by cornfields in the western meadows, to which no road or path led to or away from. Those chickens, I thought, those chickens might do the trick nicely. And now I was no longer thinking of confronting my barefoot girl in her sackcloth, but catching an alien creature with a necklight by means of fancy chickens. Welcome home, little sparrow. Settle your wings and I'm at your command, 'cause I've trained in the treetops, and I've built you a nest in the palm of my hand. Soon we'll take the night home, bury it deep in a hole in the ground. I'm as plain as a preacher, and I'm sharp as an arrow. I'm as poor as a fingerprint, and as sure as Aladdin. And I shake like a rattle. I'm as cold as a window pane, I'm as low as an anchor, and as clean as the deep, deep blue sea. There's a woman in Lemon who sells fancy chickens. Years ago, people in town generally referred to her as the Chicken Lady, but the children soon began to call her Mrs. Chicken or Mrs. Lady, and the latter was soon universally adopted, and now all in town refer to her usually as Mrs. Lady. Not directly, as she never comes to town, but she has carved for herself such a personhood that she is rather regularly discussed. It is the odd case that Mrs. Lady sells show chickens, as apparently some world exists in which having these rare and exotic species of chickens is a pleasing pastime. I am told this hobby has nothing to do with eggs, for the birds cannot produce, and more to do with the extreme physical oddity of the birds themselves. Because of their uselessness in the egg department, or possibly because her fancy chickens are so costly, there is absolutely no local interest in her Doon Daffy Loons or her pink-legged Franklin Henrys, and thus Mrs. Lady's customers are almost always from the furthest away places. They travel here from Scotland and Thailand, and may be seen strolling about Lemon for days and weeks on end, as Mrs. Lady will never tell them exactly where she lives, and mostly neither will we. In order, therefore, to buy a fancy chicken from Mrs. Lady, you must wander around Lemon asking where she lives until someone tells you. Everyone in Lemon knows Mrs. Lady lives on a farm surrounded by corn in the western meadows, but only a very few of the very kindest people will ever finally admit it. Yet eventually these warm types must conclude that enough is enough and will tell the visitors how to get to the meadow and where to push through the wild corn, and caution them to listen for the clucking to get themselves to the farm. But until then, these foreign fancied chicken hobbyists will spend a week or more roaming the streets and paths of Lemon, asking where the chicken lady lives. I am told this is a known hardship of the getting, that part of the charm of purchasing a fancy chicken from Mrs. Lady involves this frolicsome bit of treasure hunting, which means that these foreign guests are always rather thrilled to be seeking her out, are always then in the most lovely moods, keen and charming and perfectly content to be lost in Lemon, stalled out on the day before Christmas riddle of their hobby. Now these foreigners are quite fancy themselves, the human version of the chickens they collect, I might say, colourfully extraordinary and glamorous, and they make Lemon seem a regal shire, an international hotspot, as they add a delectable, if enigmatic spice to the air, whilst also enchanting the general way, the sidewalk, the café, the shops, with a lusty Louis XV shimmer. And what I mean to say here is that these foreigners have become, over the years, our fancy chickens. They are our shared pastime. We collect them and keep them trapped in our yard behind a fence of ignorance. It goes without saying that they lay eggs, and that they spend a good bit of money here, but that is a happy side effect. Our primary hobby is keeping as many chicken hobbyists in town as possible. At any rate, you might be wondering what a pink-legged Franklin Henry or a Doon Daffy Loon have to do with my elusive girl with her necklight. Simply this. It was well known that Mrs. Lady trained her exotic birds by means of a laser pointer, and that her chickens were absolutely Pavlovian in their relationship with such piercing emissions. What would happen, therefore, I wondered, if I placed myself amongst such corn, amongst such chickens, and perforce brought the girl in the sackcloth along with me, and into direct contact with creatures who might be smitten by her necklight, and were, yes, perhaps, fast enough to catch her. Which leads me to Attempt 3. You can lead a chicken to a necklight. Although I desired to make my way to the western meadows and proceed with my chicken plan at once, the consequence of traipsing about Mrs. Lady's corn maze farm and stirring up whatever chickeny ruckus I might in the middle of the night felt both unwieldy and without the merit of planning. I felt I should certainly speak to the woman, perhaps make a case for what I was after, lunatic as such a conversation might prove. So I thought, I shall return to my cave, sketch a brief plan, and undertake said plan the following night with something akin to Mrs. Lady's permission. A dream. That night in the cave, another island dream. In this one, I made my way to the very summit of the trash pile, climbed atop a jumble of metal casings, and sat upon a great ancient terminal where I began writing in a just-discovered notebook with a just-discovered pen. Writing and reading are things done on the inside, I wrote. From the inside of a person to the inside of a book. From the inside of a book to the inside of a person. Both are the storage and source of the other. Writing and reading are the story of one lover escaping to its beloved. And yet, which is really which? Which is the source, and which the image of the source? And so shall we reside together like this, dear notebook. My inside will become yours, or yours mine. And soon we shall have no worry about which is which, as we will be nothing but the same thing. When I looked up across the ocean, I expected to see my David Titan tidal wave, for I could hear it roaring and roaring along. But to my surprise, I saw something different, faint as clouds, and 5 miles off and towering into the sky was an enormous sea wall. What lurked behind that wall? If I could find the thing on the island that could keep me safe, Perhaps I could make my way across the water to this great wall and get myself on its far side. There was safety there, I knew, suddenly recalling that the last city on earth lay behind this astonishing, encircling buttress of stone. But it was once more too late. Behind me fell the first tin-cup clatters of rain from the approaching wave. I turned back to my notebook, but it was gone, and I found I had only been pretending to write upon my own palm with my outstretched finger as a pen. And as the water began to fall, hard as rocks from a landslide down upon me, I thought, these beautiful hands are not at all mine. In fact, I knew at once in the dream that they were the girl's hands, and just before I woke, just before the David Titan destroyed me, I gazed down upon my youthful legs and saw the torn-up, filthy edges of my ragged sackcloth dress. I waited till late afternoon the following day before setting off for Mrs. Lady's chicken farm. For me, that is my time of bravery. I wake timid and strange at 6 a.m., as though having deeply and dearly forgotten how it is that I exist. I do my best thinking from 7 to 11, and then grow rather curled and misbegotten from 11 to 1. Not depressed, exactly, but out of sorts, as though I've once more lost my way. I often read at such times, as there's no cheer in venturing anywhere as myself, but then I seem to gain some wood-chopping strength around 2. It's then that I might lift a large rock, fallen off one of the wild farmer's walls around my cabin, and set it back into place. Or I might go for a long, strong walk. This more beastly side elides in late afternoon, leaving in its place a sandy mixture of that morning philosopher and early afternoon strongman, when from 3 to 5 I become a kind of general. In other words, I am at my most commanding in the late afternoon. This then the time of any needed interaction, whether conflict or impolite conversation, say with the local librarian about an overdue book. There is no road, no path to Mrs. Lady's farm in the western meadows, as mentioned. A farm, rather than consisting of a single large house and barn, instead is comprised of a dozen or more camp-style huts. In fact, it was once, 50 years ago, they say, a quaint motel lodging court, and one could spend a rustic evening in one of its small fairy-tale boxes on a little bed by a little stove. Mrs. Lady lives now in one of these wee cabins, and her chickens in the others. And it is the local opinion that these cabins, in their motor court heyday, formed a welcoming arc against a curved dirt road, as a deck of cards fanned across the table base. The first thing Mrs. Lady did, it is said, was plant corn in this dirt and in the fields around her to feed her chickens. And when the corn was up and the road was gone, it is said that she next began to push and pull, somehow, her little cabins out of their geometry into their current sloppy jumble. The proof, or lack of proof of this, can be found on the library notice board, where amongst business cards for house cleaners and tree toppers is pinned one lone ancient postcard of the Peter Pan Motor Court, featuring a technicolor image of 12 wee cabins laid neatly in their arc around the boomerang of the drive. There is no corn, and there are no chickens, and who's to say what's what? But if indeed Mrs. Lady's farm and the neatly fanned technicolor motor court are one and the same, then it must be conceded that indeed the cabins have been hied and shifted. Moving southward down from my talus field, I stood to get a view from a mossy cliff above the western meadows. I spied the dozen tornadoed shacks in their clumsy cluster behind a grey fuzzing of chicken wire fence, all then greenly clenched in the stalks of far too much corn. So I took my bearings from this mossy cliff, as once down in the corn one can see nothing but corn. And by bearings I mean I set my eye on the crosswise bank of jagged clouds for rough compass. And as I came down from the cliff and lower bluff and entered the corn, I did my best to keep on as straight as an arrow to my spied jagged clouds, while doing what is also recommended to the chicken hobbyists as they searched her out. That is to say, I watched the clouds while listening for the clucks and cockadoodles of her exotic fowl. I should say that Mrs. Lady and I are considered something of an item, not of the amorous sort, nor have we ever met, but that we are considered somehow as each one half of a completed set. Whether there is more to it than the reported fact that Mrs. Lady wears a hat almost exactly like the one I wear, or keeps a likewise similar shock of hanging white hair traipsing out behind it, it is a thing in town that I am occasionally referred to as Mr. Lady, and she as Mrs. Sleeves, which raises nothing but a sigh from me, but from her, from what I hear, a vital rage. While I hoped this rage might not be directed at me, I felt it might be, and so my initial preparations upon meeting her were directed to this folly, for I expected that Mrs. Lady might believe that I had started such a rumor, as it being such an outlandish concoction that it might seem to rise from one of the parties involved, rather than any group of distant peoples. Yes, she and I are perhaps the most errant of the local citizens, the old pennies that dirty the bag of clean silver nickels. But were there not other strange types in town? Were not we all the strange types in town? I thought here, for example, as I imagined my fellow villagers as coins in a bag, of old Goodwin Sands and his brother Butler down at Glister Hall, and what sort of coin of the realm they might make in this money-bag scenario. A lump of gold and a lump of fool's gold, perhaps, but which brother was which? At any event, Mr. Lady rolled his dirty penny self through the whipping licorice of the green corn, listening for the telltale cluck of chickens in the nearby, and hoping, too, to hear the echoing shush of the girl in the sackcloth behind. But he came up sharp, and at a strange long last, at a curious structure in the field, as of the corn pulled and fastened together into a kind of semi-enclosure, within which, thatching more stalks overhead to complete her structure, there stood working an old woman with a page of white hair falling out from what appeared to be my own hat. "Mrs. Sleeves," I greeted her, thinking irony the best kind of civilized greeting, and implying a crafty distance, so I thought, which suggested the rumor of our setness had nothing to do with me. "Mrs. Lady," said she, with a little venom, and so ready in her response that I wondered how things might have gone in the reverse. "I thought," she said, with a faint relief, "that you might be the boy in the dirty sheet." You've been listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void. For more information on the show, please visit my website at radioghost.com. Thank you, my friends.